Okay, good day to everyone. This is a video recorded discussion for mythology and folklore for topics under Unit 1. It says here that developing a learner holistically is one of the goals of education. To attain this, various factors such as learners' curriculum should cover not only their cognitive development but also their affective domain. And literature plays an integral part in this holistic growth because literature appeals to the affective domain. Its significance in developing literary appreciation and comprehension skills to learners is inevitable. A country's literature mirrors its cultural, economic, and social development. Hence, the more familiar we are with the culture of a nation, the better we understand and appreciate its literature. So it says here that stories have been part of our existence and identity because whatever is reflected in our literature, that is our culture. It carries our belief system and the experiences of the different generations. They were shared to us from words of mouth and of course through written works. And these literary pieces or stories embody our ideals, aspirations, and dreams. So, what is folk literature? Okay, folk literature includes all the myths, legends, epics, fables, and folk tales which are passed down by word of mouth through the generation. And usually, this folk literature do not have identifiable or known authors. And these stories have endured because they are entertaining, they embody cultural belief system, and they contain fundamental human truths. When you say fundamental human truths, these are basic truths of human life. And they have arisen to meet variety of human needs such as the mysteries of the natural world. And sometimes you hear your grandfather or grandmother saying some statements giving you warnings from their traditional belief na ganito daw ang dahilan kung bakit ganito ang nangyayari ngayon. So, before, they used literature to explain mysteries of the natural world and they need to articulate our fears and dreams. They need to impose order on the apparent random and nature of life, and they entertain ourselves and each other. Another thing is their brevity, immediate action, easily understandable characters, recurring features, fantastic elements, and happy endings appeal to children 3 to 8 years of age. And of course, folk literature can help children to develop a sense of morality, especially yung mga bata kapag kinukwentuhan natin sila ng mga stories that teaches a lesson, so nade-develop yung kanilang sense of morality. So, when you observe yung mga bata kapag may nakita silang gumagawa ng hindi maganda or someone is violating a standard of goodness, parang, sabi doon sa kwento, ganito daw ang gagawin. So, children develop a sense of morality through the help of literature. Next, we proceed to the major forms of literature. The first one is mythology. It is a classic or legendary story that usually focuses on a particular hero or event, and it also explains mysteries of nature, existence, or the universe with no true basis in fact. So, this is most well known in the Greek and Roman mythology. So, this is apparently well known in Western culture. Their characters are gods, goddesses, warriors, and heroes. Just like yung Zeus. who is called the god of the sky, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and fidelity. So, yun yung mga examples ng ating mythology. Ayan. And what is the importance of the category or form of literature? The importance of myth is immeasurable in literature, philosophy, history, and many other parts of human life. Why? Because they have been huge part of oral, written, and visual storytelling for literally 1,000 of years. So they entertained a lot of people already because it has been existing for 1,000 of years. It's already a part of mankind's history. And another thing is, humans use this mythology or myths to explain natural phenomena and other life's mystery. Another form of folk literature is folklore. What is folklore? These are tales people tell like folk stories, fairy tales, tall tales, and even urban legends. And folklore is typically passed down by word of mouth, just like mythology, rather than being written. And another thing is, there is no author here. It just emerges from culture and is carried forward by constant retelling. What is the importance of folklore? Folk tales speak to an innate psychological need shared by all human beings. So as we encounter the world, we see pain, loss, and emptiness everywhere. So part of the answer is that we tell stories about gods, heroes, and monsters. When the good guys win, we gain psychological boost. So yung kwento nga na ganito nag-succeed si ganito. So parang we are being influenced psychologically. And we also have here the history of folk literature, which are divided into 6 periods: the classical world, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, 18th and 19th century, the Victorians or Golden Age, and lastly, the 20th century. Under the classical world, dito oral storytelling pa lang and Aesop fables were produced. Middle Ages naman, emergence of religious tales and romantic legends. And then during the Renaissance world, na-invent na ang printing press and there were educational books already. And may mga children's picture na din. And of course, shop books. What are the shop books? Is small and chiefly made books containing fairy tales. And another thing, during the 18th and 19th century, it's the rise of moralistic tales, revival of folk tales, just like the tale of Mother Goose, fairy tales in Denmark. So yung mga yun yung examples ng ating literary piece na nag-arise during that time. And the Victorians is also called the Golden Age. It's the rise of modern fantasy. It's fantasy, but it's already modernized, just like Alice's Adventures in the Wonderland, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, Little Women, and Treasure Island. And finally, in the 20th century, it's the emergence of some most notable fantasy writers of children's literature. So, dito naman sa 20th century, nasulat yung Winnie the Pooh, Charlotte's Web, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, as well as the rise of New Realism and the emergence of awards for children's books. Next, we proceed to the genres of folk literature, which are classified as the following: folk tales, legends and tall tales, epics, myths and fables, literary fairy tales. What are folk tales? Or what are myths? Myths are stories that recount and explain the origins of the world and the phenomena of nature. And it also mirrors human nature, and myths are the foundation of all other ancient stories. Epics naman are long stories of human adventure and heroism, recounted in many episodes, often in verse. However, kapag ka-epics ang sabi natin, the hero is always a human. Next one, we have legends and tall tales. Legends are stories based on both real and supposedly real individuals and their marvelous deeds. Tall tales naman are highly exaggerated accounts of the exploits of persons, both real and imagined. Fables, alam na natin ito. Fables are simple stories that incorporate characters which are animals. And its purpose is to teach a universal truth or a lesson. And next, we have fairy tales or folk tales. These are stories which grew out of the lives and imaginations of people. So, stories, example of stories under this, we have Tales of Mother Goose, English fairy tales, fairy books, nursery, and household tales. Oh, I'm sorry. So, here are they. And there are different kinds of folk tales. We have the animal tales, which are perhaps the oldest of all folk tales. We also have the wonder tales, best known of the traditional folk tales. We also have the cumulative tales, which are the ones in which successive additions are made to a repetitive plot line. And the last one, or second to the last one type, is pourquoi tales, which means why in French. And it seeks to explain natural phenomena. Because people in the primitive days, they keep on asking the question why, and they wrote these literary pieces which could answer or which could provide explanation, kaya tinawag nilang pourquoi tales. And next one, we also have the noodle head tales, which are light-hearted tales about silly people doing silly things. Example is the Three Wishes, Hans in Luck, so something like that. Next, we have literary tales. Literary fairy tales are original tales written by specific modern authors that have all the flavor of a traditional folk tale. And Hans Andersen was the most important creator of literary fairy tales, and his fairy tales has proved one of the most enduring, meaning it has a consistent existence. And next, a modern variation of literary fairy tale is a spoof or satire. Examples are James Thurber's Many Moons, The True Story of the Three Little Pigs, and Fairy Tale News. Next, we proceed to the significance of studying folk literature. Bakit natin pinag-aaralan ang folk literature? What are its significance? So, William Bascom, in a Journal of American Folklore, introduced here 4 functions of folklore. So, according to him, folklore lets people escape from the pressures imposed upon them by society, for example, in tall tales. And another thing, folklore validates culture, justifying its rituals and institutions to those who perform and observe them. Another thing is, folklore is a pedagogic device which reinforces morals and values and builds wit, for example, in scary and moral lessons. So those are the significance of studying folk literature. Next, we also have here the importance of studying folk literature. First is it could help develop strong reading skills. It could play an important role in passing along core values. It could help us in decision making, and Folktales by nature can celebrate diversity. So in short, folktales can allow us to study other culture, to model character traits, to learn about decision making, to discover love stories, and to explore new ways of seeing the world. Next, we proceed to the theories related to folk literature. These theories are divided into two, the ancient and the modern theories. So, the ancient theories, we have here the rationalism, etymological, allegorical, and euhemerism. Let us discuss each one. When we say rationalism, it states that opinions and actions should be based on reason and knowledge rather than religious belief. So when we say rationalism, from the term itself, ratio, which means reason, so opinions and actions should be based on reasons. So in literature naman, it's the idea that people are able to discover what is true by reasoning. It discourages the dependence on religion, faith, and the authority of the past or intuition to arrive at truth. So parang it is not amenable with the idea of depending on religion. Next, we also have the etymological theory. Etymology is the study of the root of or origin of a word. For example, you could explain the name of the goddess Aphrodite by saying she was born in the sea foam, since Aphros in Greek word for sea foam. According to etymologists from India, this is the author's important stage in development of linguistic thought. So napaka-importante itong theory na ito because it reveal to us the views and opinions of authors and shed a peculiar light on their ways of interpreting the connections between phenomena. Next, we proceed to allegorical theory. This theory uses allegory, a kind of literary device. It's a story within a story. It has a surface story and another story hidden underneath. So it's a figure of speech, and it is sometimes called a frame story because it's a story inside a story. So examples of allegory that may appear in literary pieces are biblical, classical, and modern allegories. Next, we also have the euhemerism. The last under ancient theory is this theory states that Greek gods were created from real stories about humans and historical events. So euhemerists believe that gods were deified humans who are noted for some great deeds. So naniniwala sila na yung mga gods na nag-exist ay mga taong mabubuti before at nabuhay lang muli. And they were parang awarded kasi mabuti sila. Next, we proceed to the modern theories. The first one here is naturalism. Naturalism, it gives emphasis on man's accidental physiological nature. Individual characters were seen as helpless products of heredity and environment. And it took its cue from Darwin's theory of evolution, which holds that life is like a struggle and only the fittest survive. Naturalism suggests a philosophical pessimism in which writers use scientific techniques to depict human beings as objective and impartial characters. And naturalism finally concludes that natural forces predetermine characters' decisions, making him or her act in a particular way. So, according to this, kung ano yung environment natin, yun yung nakaka-apekto sa ating future. Kung kumusta yung environment natin, that will be reflected in our future. Next, we have ritualism. Ritualism, according to Grossman, is a concept developed by American sociologist Robert Merton as part of structural strain theory. It's a common practice of going through the motions of daily life. Kaya nga siya tinawag na ritual. It's your habit. And ritual may be viewed as a system of symbolic act that is based upon arbitrary rules. And Ritualism stems from discontentment with the values and goals of society. It works to maintain the status quo by keeping normal everyday practices and behaviors in place. Next, we also have diffusionism. Diffusionism understands the distribution of culture in terms of origin of cultural traits and their spread from one society to another. Diffusionism is just another term for distribution. And there are two versions here, the heliocentric diffusion and the culture circles. When you say heliocentric diffusion, it's all cultures originated from one culture center. And another thing naman is the more reasonable view, the cultures originated from a limited number of culture center. Culture circles naman yon. And diffusion theory can be used as a means of explaining the appearance of similar culture elements in different groups and of understanding progressive alliteration elements with the same group. Next, we proceed to evolutionism. It's also called the literary Darwinist, and he used the concepts from evolutionary biology and the evolutionary human sciences to formulate principles of literary theory and interpret literary texts. It investigates interaction between human nature and forms of cultural imagination, including literature and oral antecedents. This theory studies literature in the context of evolution by means of natural selection, including gene-culture coevolution. Next, we have Freudianism literary. This was introduced by Simon Freud, who interpreted a work in terms of known psychological conflicts of its author, or conversely, to construct the author's psychic life. This includes pinpointing the influences of a character, yung id, ego, and superego. You will learn about that in your Prof. Ed. So here, one may psychoanalyze a particular character within a literary work, but it is usually assumed that all such characters are projections of the author's life. So sinasabi natin minsan na itong character na ito ay ganitong kanyang ugali, yung character ng ganitong literary piece ay ganito. But that's not because yung character na yun ay nag-exist talaga siya like that in the literary content, but that is just formed in your mind as a product of your psychological pleasure or appreciation. Kasi it's just an impulse produced in your mind. Next, we have the Jungian archetypal. This was introduced by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who suggested that these archetypes were archaic forms of innate human knowledge passed down from our ancestors. So this theory is very useful in understanding some works wherein the characters obviously have psychological issues, like the biographical approach. Knowing something about a writer's psychological makeup can make us insight into his words. So according to him, the more that you know about the writer, yung kanyang mga background, yung kanyang mga history, the more that we're going to appreciate, or the more that we're going to comprehend yung kanyang literary piece. Next, we also have the structuralism. This method shows how all aspects of culture are based upon some underlying structure. This underlying structure or structures are formed by interrelations. So, according to this, words do not get their meaning from themselves. So, according to this theory, you cannot interpret a literature just by focusing on a single situation or event that you have read. So, you have to study the whole structure of the literary piece so that you can get or grasp what it is trying to point out. The next one, we have the historical critical theory. So from the term itself, it's historical. So it studies literary texts, particularly ancient texts in the Bible in terms of their historical origin. So they answer the questions such as who wrote it, when was it written. So it's a historical documentation, something like that. How did it come to be in the form we have it today? So that is historical critical theory. So those are the different theories in literature. So we have here the different highlights. Mythology is a classical or legendary story that is played by gods, goddesses, warriors, and heroes to explain the mysteries of nature, existence, or the universe with no true basis. Another thing is folk literature are myths, legends, epics, fables, folktales, and many more. So you're just going to jot down the followings because these are the highlights of our unit, and you just try to understand them. You get your notebook, you listen once again, and you jot down the important details. Thank you so much for listening, and if you have questions, just post your questions, clarification, verification in our GC.